A diagnosis can save lives or it can ruin them. It can be a key to treatment or a lock on someone's humanity. Here's the truth, and I felt like I needed to make this video because a diagnosis can save your life. And it can also crush your spirit. It can open the door to treatment, medications, therapy, and accommodations that you desperately need. We live in a system where diagnosis is required in order to gain access because insurance won't pay for care without a code, without a billing code. And research can't move forward without diagnoses, without categories. So yes, diagnosis does matter, but what diagnosis should never be is a definition of your worth or of who you are as a human being, or a limit on who you're allowed to be. A diagnosis is a tool, and I discuss these topics for people who want more information or want to know about our culture's mental health. Tools can build or they can destroy, depending on how we use them and how much we put into them. A diagnosis is a double-edged sword. For some people, finally getting that diagnosis is like getting oxygen after years of suffocating. Because it's relief. It's relief. It's validation. It's proof they're not imagining things and they're not lazy and they're not just dysfunctional. But for others, that same diagnosis can feel like a life sentence. It can follow them in medical records, in school files, in job interviews, in family dynamics. It can change the way people look at you, the way they speak to you, interact with you, and it can affect the way they expect you to behave. And here's what people don't talk about enough. Both things can be true at the same time. A diagnosis can be a great thing and a detrimental thing at the same time. It's just like anything else with pros and cons. A diagnosis can be a lifeline, but it can also be a label that just weighs you down. That's why we have to be so careful with it. And we can't just hand out diagnoses willy-nilly. We have to treat it as a tool and not as an identity. Here's the part that frustrates me the most. A diagnosis is less about you and more about the system that you're stuck in. Insurance companies demand a diagnosis code before they will approve or agree to pay for any kind of treatment. Without a label assigned to you, you don't have access to treatment. You don't get care, period, if you don't have a diagnosis code. That means sometimes clinicians have to give you a diagnosis in order to get you anything that you need, in order to get you therapy or medications covered. Even if that label doesn't quite fit. And that's the part that's really important, because a lot of people have similarities to certain diagnoses or can see themselves certain traits of themselves inside of certain diagnoses, but that doesn't mean that you're diagnosed with that. That doesn't mean that just because you have certain traits that you are diagnosed with that disorder. It's all about how much it impacts your daily life. It's not about accuracy, though, with our current system. It's about access. Pharmaceutical companies shape this also. The DSM, our so-called psychiatry Bible, doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Categories have been influenced heavily by drug development, by research funding, by drug marketing and drug funding. Because when a new medication hits the market, then there's often a new addition to the DSM, or often a new disorder that it treats. And then that's added into the DSM. So let's be real. Diagnosis is often about billing and labeling and categorization, not belonging or advocacy or healing. It's about making sure the system can file the right paperwork. It's about making sure that the costs are covered. And it's about not making sure that you feel seen or understood as a person. The reason I'm talking about this at all is because I want to make sense of what mental illness is in our culture. Meaning, the reason I make these videos and discuss mental health in our culture, it's not because I agree with every single diagnosis or every criteria that they hold. I just want to help people who want those labels and who want to understand the framework that we live in, how psychiatry names and explains our suffering. Because after all, these people are just other human beings trying to find words for what we're seeking the words for, right? So if you do want a label, if you want a diagnosis, you can have the language for it. You can have a name that helps you say, this is real. What I'm feeling is real. I'm not the only person feeling it. And this is what we are going through. That's why I talk about this. Not because I think that every single person is diagnosable, or because I think that every single person should be on medication or needs mental health treatment, or even therapy for that matter. I mean, I do kind of think everybody needs therapy, but I digress. And here's the flip side. Because diagnosis does get things wrong a lot. Misdiagnosis happens every single day, right? I mean, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, ADHD is mistaken for trauma, PMDD is written off as depression or even bipolar mood swings. Autism can be labeled as OCD or social anxiety. And each wrong label means something to that person. Each wrong label doesn't just miss the truth. It can send somebody down the wrong treatment path for years and have them in their mind thinking something that isn't true. And then they embody that spirit, which can be very dangerous for somebody when we're talking about their life's trajectory. And then I talk about this a lot. Cultural bias is a huge blind spot. The DSM was written through a Western lens long ago. And yes, it's revised, but the same principles remain. And it means that a lot of emotional experiences from other cultures get mislabeled or pathologized when they shouldn't be. Because like I've talked about in another video, in one culture, grieving may look a certain way. Grieving might look like depression But in another, spiritual visions might be dismissed as psychosis. The framework is very narrow, and people are much broader than that. And sometimes what gets diagnosed as a disorder is actually a survival tactic, a survival strategy. Hypervigilance, dissociation, detachment, emotional numbing, these aren't always illnesses. They're the body's way of keeping you zen and peaceful and safe through unbearable circumstances, or just keeping you alive when all that other stuff isn't achievable through unbearable circumstances. So yes, I thought it was really important that I came on here and made this video, because diagnosis can give people words for what they're feeling. It can make them feel seen and understood, but it can also silence them by telling them the wrong story about themselves. And for all of its flaws, I don't want to pretend that diagnosis is useless, because it isn't. Because for a lot of people, it does open up access to care. And finally getting a diagnosis feels like someone turning on the lights after you've spent years in the dark. It can be that aha moment that you've been waiting for when you didn't have a name for something that was so disturbing to your daily life. It's validation sometimes. It's realizing that this isn't my fault and the things that I've been feeling aren't my fault. Or at least they have a reason behind them, or they could. That's real. And other people have experienced that too, I know. Like I said, a diagnosis can create access. Medications, therapy, school and testing accommodations, disability services. You can't get any of those things without that code in that chart. Unless you got a lot of money out of pocket to spend. And even then, sometimes things aren't accessible. It's more than that. So in that sense, diagnosis can literally change a person's life trajectory. And diagnosis can also create connection, right? When you have a name for what you've been experiencing and for what you've been through, you can find others who share that same experience, which is really powerful. That opens you up to support groups, online communities, advocacy movements, meaningful material surrounding something that matters to you, that is important in your life. They grow around diagnosis because it gives people common language. And God, let's not forget research. Because without diagnoses, without categories, without names, we can't possibly research these things. Without categories, we couldn't study the patterns. We can't test the treatments or advance medicine forward. Diagnosis has allowed us to better understand conditions. Diagnosis has allowed us to better understand conditions that would have otherwise remained unnamed or went completely unnamed forever, leaving people to suffer in total silence. So yes, a diagnosis gets a lot wrong, or it can, but it also gets some things very, very right. And that's why I don't say we should just throw it away, toss it in the trash. There's a place for it, but I say we should use it for what it's good for and nothing more. It's a tool. And tools are only as good as the hand that they're in. The problem comes when we start mistaking the tool for the whole person, mistaking the tool for their identity. When we start seeing a diagnosis code instead of a person sitting in front of us, that's the problem. When we let the label dictate what someone is capable of, what they deserve, how they should be treated, how they should be perceived, or most importantly, in our case, in my case, how much compassion that person deserves. Basically, a diagnosis can explain your symptoms, but it can't explain your soul. And that might sound cliche, but it's true. It doesn't tell us everything about you. It doesn't even tell us a little bit about you. It can describe a cluster of behaviors, but it doesn't describe your worth, and it never could, and it never has been able to. That's how much importance you allow yourself to place on these diagnoses. So that's why I'll always say this. If a diagnosis helps you, keep it. It's yours, keep it. Use it. Let it guide you to access and understanding and peacefulness. But never let it define the entirety of who you are. No. No. And if a diagnosis doesn't feel like it fits, or it feels like a box that traps you, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Remember, you're allowed to step outside of it. You don't have to live in those confines in your mind of that diagnosis, of any diagnosis. Because it's just a word. It's just a diagnosis at the end of the day. Because you are more than a label. You are more than a label. You are more than your diagnosis. Always. So if you take nothing else from this episode or this channel, let it be this. A diagnosis might be part of your story, but it is never the whole book. It can be the chapter that helps you understand what's happening, or the chapter that opens the door to treatment and support. But it should never be the ending. Your entire entity is not reducible to a code. You are not a diagnosis walking around on 2 legs. You are a human being. And you have a million different aspects to your identity. You are complex, layered, dynamic, ever-changing, full of contradictions and possibility, full of surprise. Nobody is just their diagnosis. And we all need to really, really keep that in the forefront of our minds. And again, if a label helps you, use it. If it doesn't, either way, you deserve care. You deserve understanding. And you deserve to be seen for all of who you are, not just certain aspects. Nobody should be able to just pick you apart like that. Because it's not that simple. They're missing huge pieces of the puzzle when they do that. So at the end of the day, diagnosis is just a tool. humanity is the truth. Thank you for being here today. I'll see you next time.